Right, Charles I, the only English king to lose his head. And he's the son of James that we were talking about two weeks ago, because we did Pinker last week. And yeah, he lost his head. Okay? All right, so that's the way to remember Charles in particular. He's the only English king to lose his head. He's very much his father's son, by which we mean he takes after his father. He's got a lot of similarities to his father. And these similarities are going to get him into trouble. Firstly, like James, the whole idea of being king in a comparatively rich country compared to Scotland at that time led him to be spendthrift. He spent a lot of money on his court, and the crown, which was already owing money, the crown's debts got even bigger. So the king owes money, big money, which he hopes to get back maybe sometime through taxes or whatever. And just like James again, he believed that he was king because God had chosen him to be king, what we call the divine right. Divine means from God, and right, of course, kingly. The right from God to be the king. And again, like James, he often argued with Parliament, and mostly he argued over money. Now, Parliament had slowly been growing more and more powerful over the Tudor period. During the time of Henry VIII, the Parliament didn't have so much power because Henry was a very, very strong king. But Elizabeth gave more power to people around her, and so Parliament was developing together with the king. And what the 17th century really decides is which one is stronger. Dochi no hou ga tsuioi. The Parliament or the king, or the monarch, the king or queen. And that's what's going to come to a head in the middle of the 17th century. So you've got the king fighting with Parliament over money, and you've also got him taking his position as head of the church very seriously. All of these things are very similar to his father. So it's really, in a lot of ways, it's more of the same when James dies and Charles becomes king. But the biggest difference, and it's an important one, is that Charles enjoyed engaging in war, which James, as much as possible, tried to avoid. So James at least kept the lid on his financial expenses. He didn't spend so much money because he was not needing money for expensive wars in other countries. If any, do you need a print? Does anybody need a print? Please, yeah, no, everybody's okay? All right then. So it was these wars which in the end were going to cause the main problem between Charles and his Parliament. I think something should come up saying that basically the country was quite happy. They regarded killing Villiers as not such a bad thing to do. I think there should be something up there. Maybe I forgot to put something in. The country was not particularly angry with the officer for killing Villiers. People thought that Villiers deserved to die. So anyway, Charles and the people and his relationship with... Yeah, so sorry, yes, it is. Sorry, it's up here. It says a lot about the mood of the country that the murderer was regarded more as a hero than as a villain. So the mood of the people was not in favour of Charles and not in favour of his man Villiers. They felt, Zamamiro or something. he doesn't deserve to live. So another little story that you might remember from a couple of weeks ago. Remember that plan for him to marry the Spanish princess who didn't like him when she saw him? Yeah, well, there you go. Let's just get back to that one. Remember, I think we saw this a couple of weeks ago, so just remind you, she hated him. Well, after that, he married a French princess, Henrietta. And this is another thing that started to turn the people against him. She was a Catholic. And England at this stage was very clearly a Protestant country. And if you remember the Gunpowder Plot, okay, in the early part of the 17th century in James's time, had turned people against the Catholics quite strongly. And it was not at all popular with the people that Charles had married a Catholic. And then Charles started to find all kinds of ways to raise money, not going through Parliament. And basically, it was a really bad deal if the king came up to you and said, "Hi, I'm the king of the country, I'm Charles I, would you lend me some money?" This would be a problem, because it would be difficult to say no because he's the king. But if you said yes, your money would never come back. Okay? And he was making more and more people angry by finding all kinds of ways to get money without going through Parliament, because he needed money to finance his luxurious living style and also to finance wars in other countries, particularly the 30 Years' War. So he wasn't getting on very well with the people. And then what about Parliament? Well, he's not getting on very well, as we could see, with Parliament, but things are going to get much worse. During the first 4 years of his reign, he closed Parliament down 4 times. And then after the 4th time, he just closed it down for the next, more than 10 years. Okay, just said, I don't need you. I'll run the country by myself. Well, this is called personal rule, the time from 1629 to 1640. And it came to an end because he needed money, this time, to fight against Scotland. Scotland was actually rebelling against Charles, which is kind of unusual because Charles was from a Scottish family. But he managed to make himself unpopular with his own countrymen, and Scotland was rising up against Charles. And he needed money from Parliament to finance soldiers to go and fight against the rebels in Scotland. These conflicts in Scotland are called the Bishops' Wars. If you're interested, you can check out the Bishops' Wars. I won't go into them in a lot of details. And this 3-week Parliament that he called in 1640 is called the Short Parliament. Okay, so 3 important terms relating to the history there. Personal rule, Charles closing down the Parliament and just running the country by himself. The Bishops' Wars, which he needs money to fight to try to stop Scotland from rebelling. And the Short Parliament that he goes to get money to help him to pay for that war. And here we have a sort of showing the scenes of chaos going on in Scotland at the time. Basically, Charles wanted Scotland to follow the Church of England, and Scotland didn't want to follow the Church of England. They had a slightly different approach to Protestantism. I think maybe you remember that I said Catholicism is basically one religion, but Protestantism is divided into different types. And the Scottish type of Protestantism was a little bit different from the English one. And Scotland wanted a different kind of church structure, a different kind of church service, and they were angry with Charles because he wanted to interfere with their religion. So that's partly why it's called the Bishops' Wars, because Charles, well, that is why it's called the Bishops' Wars. Charles wanted a structure based on bishops, and the Scottish didn't want to have bishops in their church structure. And so Charles called Parliament because he needed money to fight against Scotland in this argument. Remember, Charles is very stubborn, Ganco, because he thinks that he's been chosen by God and that God wants him to do this. All right, so he thinks he can't lose. Well, actually, when he called Parliament, the Parliament didn't want to talk about the money for Scotland. They wanted to talk about Charles's religious policies. They wanted to talk about his methods of taxation. He's kind of trying to say, look, I just want you to give me the money. And they're saying, we want to talk about other stuff. We're worried about things here, and we want to talk to you about these other things. So Charles was not able to cover his agenda at this stage because Parliament's, asking him different questions, and he's sort of saying, they're shouting, we need to talk about this stuff. So after 3 weeks, he closed it down again. So that's why it's called the Short Parliament. It just lasted for 3 weeks. And that's followed, of course, by the Long Parliament. So nothing was resolved after this Short Parliament. There's still a financial crisis because of these bishops' wars, and something has to be done, so Charles calls Parliament again towards the end of 1640. And again, Parliament doesn't do what Charles wants it to do. In fact, it takes one of Charles's men, William Laud, and wants to accuse him of treason. So again, just like Villiers was not popular, this William Laud, who is Charles's man, is not popular. And they're really being aggressive towards Charles and saying, look, we think for us he is a traitor. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time, and so if you challenge the Archbishop of Canterbury, he's the head of the Church of England after the King. So Charles is the top man, and the Archbishop of Canterbury is the number 2. So by challenging Laud, basically, that's the same as challenging the King, really. Okay, so it's open aggression. The feeling of the members of Parliament was that Laud is kind of taking over the country in his own way. He's bypassing Parliament, and he's making his own kind of country inside a country through church law, through the structure of the church, and that's not the way it should be. Parliament should be running the country in cooperation with the king and the church. And basically, Charles is hijacking control and not giving Parliament its correct place, and using the church structure as a way to make an independent power base. And so I'm sorry, I spelled his name Laud here. It's Laud. Laud is correct, L-A-U-D. I don't know what I was thinking when I spelled it Lord. Okay, so that's the situation. And so Parliament meets to discuss this important question. And you've got mostly the House of Lords are supporting the king, supporting William Laud and supporting the king. And the House of Commons is against him. Now, the House of Lords is the kind of more elite group, and the House of Commons is the sort of more general public. So it was typical in this sort of conflict that the House of Lords would be closer to the king's position. Well, the king now makes, I think we'd have to say, is a bad mistake, really. We've got several other people being impeached by the politicians, mostly coming from the House of Commons. The Deputy of Ireland, who had, again, he tried to fight against Scotland by raising an army in Ireland, and what the Parliament was saying was, yeah, he's getting those soldiers from Ireland, and he says he's going to take them to fight against the Scottish. Really, he's going to use them against us. The king is going to attack his own country. The king is going to push out his own parliament using Irish troops. So Lord Stafford is also impeached by Parliament, pushing Charles more and more into a corner. He actually says, okay, you can have Stafford, and he signs Stafford's death warrant. The Stafford is in fact put to death. He sort of thinks, if they have Stafford, they'll leave me alone. A rather nasty, cowardly thing to have done. But things don't sort themselves out, and the country now starts to slide into civil war. The Long Parliament started making various reforms about parliamentary rights, including saying the king cannot tell us when we have to close down. That should be our decision. So they start making laws that go directly against the king. The king's saying, if I don't need you, I close Parliament down and you all go home. And Parliament's saying, no, we'll decide when we close down. We'll decide when we go home. So it's a direct challenge now to the king. Then there's there's a rebellion. We've got Scotland, and now we've got Ireland also rebelling against England. So money again becomes necessary. We need money to send an army into Ireland to control the rebellion there. And then finally, Parliament says, look, we've got 150 different things that we think you're doing wrong. Here's a list of them. We don't like this, we don't like this, we don't. 150 different things. And Charles, at this point, makes what is probably a strategic mistake. He brings soldiers, armed men, into the Parliament buildings, into the Houses of Parliament, to arrest the politicians that he doesn't like. He tries to make it an active, kind of physical confrontation. This has never happened. And it's going to work out in the end badly for Charles. These particular members of Parliament weren't there anyway because they'd been warned that this was going to happen, that they'd gone somewhere where they were going to be safe. So now you've got Parliament and the King openly in confrontation. Since Charles could not arrest those members of Parliament, and since Parliament was obviously, it was now in a fairly strong position, Charles escaped from London because he was open to attack. He was unpopular. He didn't know who would really be his friends. So he left London, he went to Oxford, and he made Oxford his base for raising an army to fight against the Parliament. And so that's the Civil War. That's how it begins. Okay?